Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
So I can imagine that same conflicts, the same tensions, you just put it on the moon. Just one random, it just occurred to me, just one completely random thought. Pakistan and India have fought a couple of wars, but in 1983-84, there was this, the glacier, it's called Siachen Glacier. There were nobody over there. And there can be a strategic importance, but it's after you cross over Siachen and so on and so forth. So Indian forces, since nobody was there, Indian forces actually came in, and then Pakistan found out there's a Pakistan sent forces over there. And then they were fighting for, I think, a decade or so. And the fighting was not like every day they are fighting, but more like, okay, so they have these lines, occasionally you would fire or something like that. And the biggest rate of casualties was purely medical. So like if you run, well, you can actually die or you can actually get seriously ill because there is not much oxygen there. I remember National Geographic had, that's what I remember, sort of like, had a piece on it. It was a very short piece, but it said, it is like fighting on the surface of the moon.
The moon,
Because there is nobody there. There is not real value there either, but the two countries are fighting because, wait a minute, why are you here? No, you're not supposed to be here, so I'm here. And then it follows the same thing. So that's something like I can imagine, sort of like, on the moon, an extension of the Cold War.
That's a great example, actually. Because there's a lot of reaction to symbolic action. So India went there. That means that, hey, they are claiming something. Well, they don't have rights. So if there is adversarial between Pakistan and India, obviously they will react. So this is what did you call it? The agreement, the big one. The
Artemis Accord.
How is that spelled?
ARTEMIS. Artemis. So that's the sister of Apollo. So the whole program for the US is the Artemis program.
Artemis. Okay.
And that's where it's based upon.
Okay. And then this one is the one where China is excluded, right?
Yes.
Okay.
China is
excluded, right? Very interesting because it's sort of what's interesting here is the United States, for example, has not ratified the Hague, the International Court, right? They have not, right? They talk about human rights, but they have not, right? Whereas China and I think Russia and all those, and then they have, because the United States again thinks that they are a chosen nation, they are special, and so on and so forth. And so the question then becomes, why is not, and I think we were talking about that exactly. That's going to spill over and if China claims we are doing this for humanity, the Americans are going to scoff. They're going to say, no, we are the keepers of the earth, and we are going to do X, Y, and Z, and you are not. And it creates this conflict between the two. And I think, in my opinion, things will become really, they'll become real when you have presence there and things like what you just mentioned, the water resource. China is going to say, well, I have as much claim to it as you, and the United States is going to say, no, we were there first, maybe they were there five years before when we created these pipes, and so we own the infrastructure, and so on. It becomes an extension of. So let me ask you the next follow-up question, which is, what kind of a paradigm shift do you think needs to happen to sort of disconnect the Earth from the moon and say there are rules to play within on Earth, but in the moon, it's a totally different ball game. Is that something that is within our capacity, whether technologically everything is doable, but politically, do you think there is a way to get to that point, or is it just we cannot think other ways than our system, concept of ownership, concept of conflict, concept of might makes right, so to speak, after all is said and done? Is it an opportunity we're losing by just continuing to do business as usual over there?
Right. So I would respond to this first with pessimism and then with potential optimism. Okay, potential. Okay. Sure. Pessimism because the pace with which things are happening, I really think it's going to be an extension of the same kind of values, the same kind of problems that we have here on Earth. We're going to bring them out to space, and the creation of the Space Force, for example, with the US. I mean, so all of those things are simply the context of sort of like, adversarial context of profits. And that's again, the problem with the sort of like capitalistic, because the values of corporations become the sort of like, the primary ways of bypassing, for example, the treaties as well. Exactly. So all of those things, unfortunately, say that our steps into space are going to be as fraught as our steps into various places here on Earth, and ultimately the geopolitics that is here is going to get transported. It's just, you're just going to but add another theater to geopolitics, right? And again, part of the problem is that it's happening very fast, very soon, right? I mean, so we don't have time to react. And also there are some countries that have actual means to go there. And so might gets right here. It's also a slightly different thing. It's not just about might, but also capability. And capability is like, I'm there, I'm setting up the rules, right? Exactly. So I think, and in some sense, and this is where I'm going to pivot from pessimism to optimism of what can be done. The ultimate pessimism regarding that is that it is crucial, because once, as I said, once what you do on the moon, this is the first time humans will be doing something outside in outer space, and not in lower Earth orbit, but actually on the moon. That sets the template for any other place to go. So it's a very important step, because once you do that, then this question that you're asking, well, you did that on the moon. So Mars would definitely take precedence from there. And yes, the Apollo program, Apollo landing, moon race of the 1960s was in the context of the Cold War. Yes, that whole thing had nothing to do with science. It was about the Cold War. Nevertheless, the flag that was put in was American, but there was a plaque. And there is enough critique of that, because the plaque did say that we come here in peace for all mankind. And of course, as you were also mentioning, that a lot of the colonialism here on Earth was also sort of like, for all mankind. So
the same story.
That critique is absolutely justified. But I also, and this is where the optimism angle comes in, there is this thing about all mankind. Like there was this hope that, so I was growing up in Pakistan, not at the time of the Apollo landings, but certainly later on. And even the rhetoric matters. Rhetoric matters because I can see, okay, there is cynicism. It's cynical about saying about for all mankind and stuff like that. But on the other hand, in the 80s, watching the space shuttle and stuff like that, like, this is cool. This is space, and it's for all mankind. So even though in reality it may not be the case, but the rhetoric still matters. And so how can we pivot to the more optimistic angle? And one is something that we started our conversation with, of looking at the Earth, right? So Apollo program, it was the sort of like, born out of the Cold War adversarial context, a competition. But you also got the first pictures, for example, of the full Earth. And that became sort of like a blue marble picture, for example, or Earthrise picture that became really famous from Apollo 8, and in which they took the picture, and suddenly they saw sort of like all of humanity over there, and these, and then people were talking about sort of like you don't see the borders and stuff like that. Carl Sagan's famous passage from the pale blue dot, that is from the Voyager spacecraft. So space can also provide you with a radically different way of thinking about the Earth. So while we are talking about sort of like business as usual, like transferring these geopolitical competition or context to the moon, you also have, looking at the Earth, you also have this perspective, which is really amazing. And in some sense, people argue about it, whether that was also, some people argue it's the birth of the modern environmental movement, which was from 60s and then to 70s, that that picture, because that just showed how fragile our own planet is. So can there be a fundamental shift away from this? So that's where my optimism part comes in, or at least part that may argue that you and I and others, we have to speak up about what kind of future we want. And I think that is crucial, because one thing is, so the Artemis program is going to go up, or yes, SpaceX or Blue Origins, they are going to stake resources from there. Oh, well, that's business as usual. But on the other hand, you can also imagine pressure building up on Earth across different countries, talking against, arguing against, protesting against exactly this kind of exploitation, and arguing for a better future. And so one example can be, and I think sometimes it gets conflated and it becomes a problem. So the younger generation right now, for example, they are doing a better job about climate change. They are the ones who are going to be dealing with that too, but also there is a global movement. Countries need to do more, right? So that was this aspect, this pressure that comes in. And I think a similar type of thing, arguing for a better future on the moon, for example. I think, but for that, we need awareness also. What are the issues? What is actually going on? What kind of contracts are being written, right? So we need an awareness, and then to connect that with that environment, just like the way the image of the Earth, the blue marble image of the Earth, or the Earthrise image that became the symbol for environmentalism. I think we should use that and to project it back on the moon as well, that we want a better humanity's future. The problem right now that comes in is that it gets divided into, we are against going into space. And I'm talking about people who would be allies in there, and they would say, we shouldn't go, or we should not seek a backup planet, which sometimes people use that rhetoric, or we cannot leave behind problems here on Earth. And so all that is true, but whether we want it or not, whether we like it or not, humans are going to the moon. Humans are going to go to the space.
Yeah.
So I think, and I'm a critic of the way we are doing it. So this is one of those questions that comes in, that we really need to think how we are going to go to space. And again, that's my personal bias, and not about that we should not go to space, because then you are cutting yourself off from a really important conversation. So I would really hope that just like environmental movement became linked with sort of that image, I think the moon should sort of galvanize people to say, no, companies or countries should not say, okay, this is my territory on the moon. We should really say, no, this is really for humanity.
Yeah.
How is that going to take place? I don't know, but I think that's the kind of alliance we need.
Yeah. No, this is, this is really amazing feedback you're giving me. So, I think what I'm taking away from there is this, that the moon and the issues that it will raise, that will bubble up, is a strategic sort of point of debate. Meaning, that's where things become clear, right? Why should we own the moon? And why should we, why can't it be a place where we can cooperate, right? And why aren't we cooperating? And hopefully that sort of will start to unpack things, so that ultimately whatever we learn about, what does it take to cohabitate in the moon will translate into what it takes to cohabitate on Earth, right? For example, why are there these treaties and why are they respected? And why are we allowing these corporations to come in and exploit resources? It becomes very clear when we're talking about the moon, but then we come and say, well, wait a minute, we're doing it at the same time as Earth, right? So I agree 100% with you. I think the solution really is going to be, we will get our act together in the moon if we get our act together on Earth. And I think the moon will help us get our act together on Earth because it will crystallize the issues for us, right? And here, it sort of takes away the issue of human beings owning something already, right? It's not like the Palestinians owned their land, and then you had the native, and then people pretended that there were nobody there, and it was. We agree that there's nobody there, right? So we start from scratch, right? Nobody owns this. So how do we proceed? Can we figure out new rules, and can we use those rules back? Which is, I think, what you're saying.
And there is one way of again adding to that thing is like to think of moon as a world heritage, right? And so there are some indigenous groups sort of like who think about sort of like natural wonders as sort of like as really crucial to it. It's like nobody can own it, nobody can own land, and that was one of the big battles over there in the American West as well, because the concept of ownership was very different. I mean, people didn't think sort of like that you can actually own something that is natural. And so, but on the moon, there are indigenous cultures. There are a lot of other cultures in the world that hold moon in a special way, and so perhaps. I mean, again, so this is where the complete idealism comes in, sort of like, declare it as a national, or not the global Earth Park, like, United Nations World Heritage.
Yeah. No, I'm, the thing is, I'm optimistic. I think he froze. It's probably can you hear me?
Didn't lead to exploitation in the same way. But again,
sorry,
resources.
I lost 10 seconds of you talking.
Like the Antarctica, for example, here, that has remained interesting because there the emphasis has been more on research. But again, that's not the motivation for going to the moon. People are not saying, hey, let's establish some research station on the moon. Right from the get-go, people are talking about profits. So I think we really have to think about how to bring up. And I think the first part would be people should realize we need to hurry up. These things need to be brought forth now. Decisions are being made now about what's going to happen on the moon.
Yeah. And then before we know it, it's right. We have facts on the ground that are very hard to.
And if I can plug in two books that just came, and this is changing. Please. So just this, I think past January, there is this book, Astrotopia. This is by Mary Jane Rubenstein. She's a religion professor. And so the subtitle is The Dangerous Religion of the Corporate Space Race. It's pretty good. It's a very critical in terms of going to the space. She also kind of like is on that position that maybe why do we even go to space? Maybe humans should not go into space, which again, I disagree with that. I don't think, I think that you can make reasonable arguments for going into space. I
agree with you. Yeah.
And then,
go ahead.
And then just came out 2 weeks, I think, early March. This is Off Earth, and this is by Erica Nesvold, and it's ethical questions and quandaries for living in outer space. So a couple of books that have just come out. So conversation is taking place, and we really need to keep it and sort of really think through. I think it's not just, people would say, who cares? I'm not interested in space, or who cares what's going on? It's for everybody. This is one of those big topics, big issues that it affects everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, do you have a book you want to plug? Since we,
I don't have a book, but what I want to plug is actually I have a I make sort of like videos as well, and I have a channel. One channel is in Urdu, so audience in South Asia. But I recently started an English channel, which is Kainat Astronomy in English. And there, actually, I am starting. So this is sort of like, a good conversation. There is a 20-part series on very specifically on societal issues for human settlements in space. And that will start by the end of April. And there will be 20 interviews thematically dealing with various aspects of sort of like ownership, labor rights. That's a whole other thing that I'm interested in, sort of like, especially for low income countries, for like, what's going to happen. And we have cases of Dubai, for example, here, what's going to be happening on the moon and so on and so forth. So please, the channel right now is up. There is a segment of NPR that I do for the local NPR that's on it. But by the end of April, you are also going to see a 20-part series of interviews just focusing on societal issues for settlements, human settlements.
And how would we search on to find these?
Well, I'm going to give you a link.
A link. Give me a link.
You can also find. Yeah, I will send you a link, and you can also find youtube.com/Kainat Astronomy in English. Kainat means cosmos in Urdu. So I use Kainat Astronomy in English.
Okay.
That
I'll make sure to show that in the show links. By the way, I'm sure you are aware of these astonishing translation software in real time, all languages that you can think of. So if somebody wants to watch and listen to you, they can just put their app in front of the YouTube, and it will translate in real time. So
that's where your specialty is coming in. So that would be great. So I have another channel, Kainat Astronomy in Urdu. And so again, that's youtube.com/Kainat Astronomy in Urdu. There we have about sort of like over 200 videos. And use that. I mean, we do have English subtitles there, but I think what you are saying is like, you can just put it in front of
and you speak maybe French, or you speak German, and you don't, or or a language that's not English. I mean, we're getting to a point, by the way, and I'm sorry, I'm sort of hawking my passion here.
No, that's certainly right.
We're getting to a point, actually, where in real time, you speak a language I don't speak, I speak, basically we have no intersection between us. Like there's no English or, lingua franca. So you can speak in your own language. I speak my language in my smartphone. I'm seeing exactly in real time translation. I mean, that just enables us to talk to each other in any languages, and then to leverage the creations, like your creations in Urdu, to go way beyond your audience as the Urdu audience. So anyway, thank you so much, Professor Hameed. You have opened my eyes to many new things, and also helped me deepen my understanding a little bit. There's a lot to learn, and I need to invest more, because I think for me, the way I'm coming from, my angle is, it looks like the moon is a really interesting place to hash out some important issues that are right now cluttered with all kinds of things, right? Sort of like a nice starting point to clarify, what does ownership mean? Is there only one way to divide the resources? Do we need to divide them, and so forth? But thank you again. I know your time is very valuable, and I appreciate very much.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you for inviting me.
The conversation. Thank you.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.